Hello friends, this is Chain. Welcome back to Chain of Commander, and it is time for the month of July's Patron's Choice Deck Tech of the month. And for this month, they had the choice between 4 of the amazing new commanders to come out of Modern Horizons 2, and in their infinite wisdom, they came to a consensus. No, they didn't. They ended up in a 3-way tie, which means I need to step in as a tiebreaker, so let's turn this into a Chief's Choice Deck Tech, and I decided to go with General Ferrous Rokiric, because General Ferrous Rokiric gave me the option to do a deck building restriction I've always wanted to try, but never had the opportunity to until now. Now, before we get into that, I will, just as a friendly reminder, there is a deck list in the description below to reference at your leisure, and if any of these cards seem like something you personally want to build with, definitely consider using that TCG Player affiliate link below. It won't cost you a single cent more, but it will help out the channel. That said, let's take a look at General Ferrous Rokiric here. General Ferrous, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. You know what, let's just call him GFR, so much easier. GFR is 1 red-white for a 3/1 legendary creature human soldier, hexproof for monocolored, and whenever you cast a multicolored spell, create a 4/4 red and white artifact golem creature token. So, what is this deck building restriction I've always wanted to try but never had the chance? Well, I always wanted to build a gold card only deck, and what I mean by that is that every card in the deck, sans the basic lands, is exactly red and white in color identity. This means we don't have access to some of the stalwarts of the format like Path to Exile, Blasphemous Act, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet. We don't have access to those, but the cards we do have access to pretty much are all going to trigger GFR's second ability. Granted, there's like a couple split cards or double face cards that when we cast them will only count as a single color, but 95% of the spells in this deck, roughly, don't actually do the math, will trigger GFR's second ability, meaning that we get a whole bunch of golems out there. That said, before we get too far into how we win, let's go over the veggies with this deck and start where I like to start all my deck techs, with the ramp. Alright, as far as ramp is concerned, we're already in Boros, which is not known to be one of the good ramping color combinations. And then, on top of it, we have this deck building restriction, which, as I mentioned earlier, restricts our access to classics like Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. Luckily, our curve is pretty low, so we don't feel the sting from the lack of ramp options too much, but we do have a couple of things here. We have Boros Signet, we have Talisman of Conviction, and that's about it. Let's move on to card draw. As with the card draw in this deck, like with the ramp, being in Boros, we already have limited access to what we would consider traditional card draw, so we do need to get a bit creative with how we take a look at card advantage in this deck. To that end, we have things like Showdown of the Skalds, which exiles the top 4 cards of our library to be cast up until the end of the following turn, and chapters 2 and 3 also allow us to make our creatures bigger whenever we cast some spells. Then we have ways to turn maybe less exciting cards in hand into something a bit more impactful and Thrilling Discovery, which gains us 2 life, and then we may discard 2 cards to draw 3 cards, and Heartwarming Redemption, which just has us discard our whole hand, and then we draw that many cards plus 1, and then also gain some life out of it. We also have some ways to get some extra value out of spells we may have previously cast by allowing us to cast them again from the graveyard. We have Venerable Warsinger, which whenever they do combat damage to a player, we can return
a creature
with mana value X or less back to our hand, where X is the amount of damage that it dealt. Radiant Scroll Wielder. This gives all of our instants and sorceries lifelink, but more importantly, at the beginning of our turn, at our upkeep, we can
exile
a random instant or sorcery from our graveyard
and cast it that turn.
And then we have Reconstruct History. This is one of the cooler cards to come out of Strixhaven, in my opinion, because it allows us to return one of almost every card type from the graveyard to our hand in Boros. This is an effect I would normally associate with green, so it's really cool that Red-White got this ability. And this can easily represent 2, 3, 4 cards, especially in the late game when we have a nice stocked graveyard. But beyond just getting things back from the graveyard, beyond filtering cards in our hand, some of the coolest ways to take advantage of card advantage is by cheating stuff out. And we got a couple ways to do that. We have Sunforger, which when we unattach it from a creature allows us to just get an instant from our deck with mana value 4 or less and cast her for free. Velumachus Lorehold. Whenever we attack with Velumachus Lorehold, we get to look at the top 7 cards of our library and cast an instant or sorcery among them for free. We have Winota, Joiner of Forces. Whenever we attack with a non-human creature, such as our golems, we can look at the top 6 cards of our library, take a human from among them, and put them on the battlefield. And the cool thing about that one is that triggers per creature, per non-human creature attacking. So if we're attacking with 3 golems, that means we are digging 18 cards deep to potentially get 3 human buddies to hop on out and help us out. So card advantage in this deck, honestly, really ended up being a surprisingly good package. And one thing I'm hoping we're drawing with all these ways to get cards and things for free is some ways to remove our opponent's stuff. Ooh. Alright, as far as removal in this deck is concerned, a majority of it is going to be damage based. There's a couple less conditional things in there that might be a bit more definitive in the removal, but you will find that most of it does do damage and does rely on it doing enough damage to the creatures to hopefully kill them. We have things like Rip Apart, which does 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, but if we don't have one of those we want to get rid of, we can also use it to destroy a target artifact or enchantment. Intimidation Bolt. This does 3 damage to a creature, and then each other creature
on the battlefield
cannot attack this turn. And then Justice Strike. Imagine, remember the times that people like grab your hand and they're like, "You stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself." That's essentially Justice Strike here. Creature deals damage to itself equal to its own power. So as long as its power is greater than its toughness, it will theoretically die. Man, imagine that, just punching yourself so hard in the face that you die. Crazy. We also have things that have like Lightning Helix, just 3 damage to any target and we gain 3 life. War Leader's Helix, same thing, but instead of 3, we do 4 damage and gain 4 life. And then Firemane Avenger, this is a creature with Battalion that when it attacks along with 2 or more other creatures, it will trigger a Lightning Helix effect, dealing 3 damage to any target and gaining us 3 life. We have Foundry Champion. When it enters the battlefield, it does damage to any target equal to the amount of creatures we control. And in the late game, this could very well be a one-shot, take a player out of the game force kind of effect. It also gives
itself +1/+0 for a red mana and +0/+1 for a white mana.
Legion Guildmage, we can either use it to do 3 damage to each opponent or tap down a single creature, in case it's threatening. And then we have Ride Down. This destroys a blocking creature, and any creatures being blocked by it get trample to get that damage through anyways. And then we have a handful of board clears here. Aurelia's Fury. This does X damage distributed as you like amongst any number of creatures or players. If a player is dealt damage this way, they can't cast non-creature spells until end of turn. And if a creature is dealt damage this way, it gets tapped down. So a great way to maybe tap down a board to get some damage in. Deafening Clarion. This gives us the option to do 3 damage to each creature, or give our creatures lifelink, or potentially both. This one's nice too because this is 3 damage. Our 4/4 golems tend to be pretty safe. Solar Blaze. This is very similar to Justice Strike rather, in that it has each creature deal damage to itself equal to its power. So just imagine a whole army of creatures out there just, punching themselves in the face until they're dead. It's kind of funny. And lastly, as far as board clears go, we have Path to Metal. This one is not a super impactful board clear, but let's just go over it. Path to Metal, when it enters the battlefield, does 1 damage to each creature without haste, vigilance, double strike, or first strike. And then, when we attack with 2 or more creatures with haste, double strike, first strike, vigilance, it transforms. And it transforms into Metzali, Tower of Triumph, which has 3 abilities on it. It can be tapped for any color of mana. We can tap it to do 2 damage to each opponent, or we can pay to destroy target creature that attacked this turn at random. And then as far as our general artifact and enchantment removal beyond the Rip Apart mentioned earlier, we have things like Duergar Hedgemage, which can destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or both, depending on what sort of lands we control when it enters the battlefield. Shattering Blow. Quick, clean, easy, straight to the point, exile target artifact. And then Wear and Tear, a classic split card. Wear allows us to destroy target artifact. Tear allows us to destroy target enchantment. Now, as far as removal is concerned, not only do we have it for our opponents, It also tends to be the bane of our existence, being a creature-based deck, so we want to have things in place that help protect us from whatever our opponents are trying to do to remove us. So what do we have in that sort of regard? Alright, as far as our protection is concerned, we actually have a nice, tight little package in regards to that. We have things like Tagic, Legion's End, which prevents all non-combat damage to our creatures. This includes our own board clears, keeping our team safe while potentially taking out the rest of the table. Archangel Avacyn. Archangel Avacyn has Flash. When it enters the battlefield, it gives all of our other creatures indestructible until the end of turn. And then, if at some point one of our non-angel creatures dies, Archangel Avacyn transforms into Avacyn the Purifier, which deals 3 damage to each opponent and each other creature on the battlefield. And we also have Legion's Initiative. This one's a cool, spicy one I didn't hear of before I started researching for this deck. It gives all of our red creatures +1/+0, all of our white creatures +0/+1. So once again, if they're both, they get both benefits. And that also has an activate ability of pay red, white, and sack it. You can exile all of your creatures until the beginning of the next combat step, in which case they return with haste. So if somebody casts a board clear, we can do that in response to save all of our non-token creatures and just bring them back later. We also have things like Deflecting Palm, just a great way if we see a big chunk of damage coming to our face, we can use it to whip it right back around to that damage source's controller, and then Squeeze Embrace, a nifty little aura that gives a creature +2/+2, but when that creature dies, we can then return it to our hand just to cast it again later. Now, being a combat-centric deck, you know I'm going to have some spells in here that help break the combat math in our favor. We have things like Martial Glory. This gives target creature +3/+0, and then a target creature +0/+3, and it can really be the same creature if you want, or it could be 2 different ones depending on what combat requires. Rally the Righteous. Untap target creature, and any creature that shares a color with it, they get +2/+0. And this is kind of a way that we can just give something, or give our team pseudo vigilance. Granted, we'll be relying on the fact that our opponents might not be playing as many red or white creatures as us, but who plays red and white in Commander? I mean, come on. Desperate Stand. Target creature gets +2/+0 and vigilance and first strike actually until end of turn, and it has Strive, which means we can pay a little bit extra to target additional creatures. And then lastly here, as far as our extra punch is concerned, we have Waves of Aggression. This is an extra combat card. You know I need to shove extra combat cards in here because there are some great ways to just really punch through the damage. This has Retrace as well, which means we can turn extra dud lands late game into additional castings of this spell. Alright, then moving on here, we actually have a handful of cards that I really couldn't sort into any of the above categories because they can fit into 1, 2, 3, 0, 5. They can really just fit into any of them, so I just decided to put them here. We got Boros Charm. This deals 4 damage to any target, or can give our creatures indestructible until end of turn, or give a creature we control double strike. I'd say most often we'll be casting it to give our team indestructible, but I can see plenty of situations where either of the other 2 options will come in handy. Integrity and Intervention. This is one of the split cards where Integrity can give a target creature +2/+2. Intervention acts as a duplicate of Lightning Helix, dealing 3 damage to any target and gaining us 3 life. Then we have Lorehold Command. Lorehold Command gives us some options here. Between making a spirit, giving our team +1/+0 and indestructible, Lightning Helixing something, so dealing 3 damage and gaining us 3 life, or allowing us to sack a permanent to draw 2 cards, we can choose any 2 of those. Once again, this is another one where I feel that will be a bit more used towards the indestructible side of things, but I can definitely see sacking permanent to draw 2 cards, or Lightning Helixing, really any of them might be able to be very handy depending on the situation. Then we have Order and Chaos. Order will exile an attacking creature for us. Chaos makes it so creatures can't block. So this is a great way to prevent our opponents from maybe stopping the onslaught of which we will bestow upon them to finally take them out of the game. And then we have Response and Resurgence. Response deals 5 damage to target attacking and blocking creature, but Resurgence gives our creatures first strike and vigilance and an additional combat step. I like my additional combat steps, especially when our whole deck is designed around taking people out through combat. I also like these modular cards because they are so useful in so many situations. What do you folks like? Have you been liking the video so far? If so, definitely consider hitting that like button in the corner. You know that I would appreciate it. But that said, we have a combat-centric deck, but we haven't even gotten to the key bits of the combat. We need to go over our fighters, our soldiers, our weapons. Let's take a gander. All right, as our soldiers go, we have plenty of them. We have our French vanillas. These are things that just have some keywords on them. And Ferrous Rokiric, which has first strike. Boros Swiftblade, which has double strike. Ceradon Yearling, which has vigilance and haste. Sky Terror, which has flying and menace. And then Swiftblade Vindicator has 3 whopping keywords in double strike, vigilance, and trampling. Remember, despite these appearing to be low impact, as long as we have GFR on the field as well, they'll also be bringing along a 4/4 Golem Buddy. Then we have our token team. These are the guys that help us make some tokens beyond just our golems. Blaze Commando. Whenever an instant or sorcery we control deals damage, we get 2 tokens. Sky Knight Vanguard. Whenever it attacks, it brings along a token buddy with it. And then some home guild mage can give our team +1/+0, or it can make us a 1/1 token. Then we have a couple of enchantments here that are also kind of in this category because they do exactly what I said they do. They make tokens. Outlaws Merriment. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to make 1 token at random of the list that they have on that card. And Rise of the Hobgoblins. When it enters the battlefield, we can pay X to create X 1/1 goblin tokens. And there's also the ability to give our team first strike for turn. And then we have the prima donnas, the one-man armies. These are the guys that think that they can do it all by themselves. We have a Crone Hoplite. When it attacks, it gets +X/+0, equal to the amount of attacking creatures we have, which can be quite a lot, to be honest. Battlegate Mimic is a 2/1 that can become a 4/2 if we cast a red-white creature for the turn, a red-white spell of any kind for the turn. Boros Challenger. This just has Mentor with a very expensive form of fire breathing on it, but if we have the extra mana, we can dump it into it and then use the Mentor ability to help buff something else. Figure of Destiny. This is one of those cool, not necessarily level up, but like upgradable creatures that we can dump mana to over the course of the game to progressively make it bigger and bigger. Tajic, Blade of the Legion, has Indestructible and Battalion, so if it attacks with 2 other creatures, it will also get +5/+5 until end of turn. And then 10th District Legionnaire, whenever targeted with the spell, will allow us to scry 1 and get a +1/+1 counter on it. But those are the prima donnas, like those are the ones that they think they can do it on themselves. We have plenty of soldiers here that understand that teamwork makes the dream work. So we have things like Adriana, Captain of the Guard, which gives all of our creatures melee. Agrus, Kos, Wojek, Veteran. All attacking red creatures get +2/+0. All attacking white creatures get +0/+2. Once again, if it's both, they get both benefits. Balefire Liege. Red creatures get +1/+1. White creatures get +1/+1. If it's both, they get both. And also, whenever you cast a red spell, you get to deal 3 damage to any target. When you cast a white spell, you get to gain 3 life. So, once again, our red-white spells are turned into additional lightning healing. So, we have GFR in this out. For every spell, you're getting this spell, you're getting a lightning helix effect, and you're also getting a golem. That's a lot of value. We also have things like Boros Guildmage, which can give a creature heist or first strike. Honored Crop Captain, which when it attacks gives our whole team +1/+0. And Iroas, God of Victory, gives our whole team menace and prevents damage to attacking creatures we control. Then, to wrap up our army here, we have our 2 scrappy boys, our 2 that, they do things their own way. Haktos, the Unscarred, has to attack each combat if able, and has protection from a random mana value upon entering the battlefield. And then True Fire Captain, when it gets damaged, it deals that much damage to target player. So if your opponent's coming at you with something big and beefy, let's see if they'll want it right back in their face. All right. We got one last thing to go over. We'll just go over the mana base here, and then we'll go over how to play this deck in different situations. But at this point, you guys seen the lion's share of the list. How have you been liking it? If this seems like something you've been enjoying, if you want to see future deck decks, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button below. I'd love to have you folks join us, especially because this channel is about to go through a major renaissance, and I think all of you are going to really enjoy the type of content I'll be coming up with in the future. That said, like I said, let's get to this mana base. Let's wrap this up, and let's call this thing a wrap. Alright, as far as our mana base is concerned here, well, our deck is very color greedy. Pretty much every card we have has at least 2 pips, quite often in different colors on them. So we need to make sure we have pretty much as many duels as I can find. I tried to keep budget in mind when I was designing this deck, so if by the end of it you want to add the shop land and the fetch land and the true duel, definitely go ahead. The deck can use it. But for now, I put in Battlefield Forge, which is the pain land. Clifftop Retreat, this is the one that checks to see if you already have a mountain or plains already. Fury comes, Snarl, this is the one that if you got a mountain or plains in hand, it can come in untapped. Inspiring Vantage enters untapped if it's one of your first 3 lands. Needle Verge Pathway, flipped over, becomes Pillar Verge Pathway. You just choose which side you want to play when you go to play it. Rugged Prairie is a filter land that can turn a red or white mana into any combination of the 2 times 2. Just read the card, it makes more sense that way. Spectator Seating, this just enters untapped as long as we have more than one opponent. Sunbaked Canyon, essentially we can sack this to draw a card if we really need it, otherwise it just was 1 damage to us when we tap it for mana. And lastly, as far as our multicolored lands go, we have Temple of Triumph. This is the only one that's guaranteed to enter tapped. Our deck is mana greedy, our deck wants to go fast, we want to try to minimize hitting tap lands in the early game. So that's why the only one we're playing is the one that can really set up draws as well. Then we have only 2 utility lands because it turns out there are only 2 lands in all of Magic that are exactly the red-white identity as far as utility lands are concerned. So we have Slayer Stronghold, which can give a creature +2/+0, Vigilance, and Haste. Sunhome, Fortress of the Legion, can give a creature double strike. And that's it. And then, as far as our basics are concerned, we have 12 plains and 11 mountains. And that, my friends, friendos, is a gold border only General Ferrous Rokiric deck. And boy, the value in Boros of all color combinations really starts adding up with this when you're getting golems and card draw and lightning helixes with pretty much every spell you cast. It's pretty bonkers, but how do we go about playing it? When it comes to playing this deck, you got to identify really early what sort of direction you want to take it, because there's 2 primary ways you can go. Let's say you're at a table where everybody else is not really playing too much in terms of removal or interaction. You can feel free to just load up the board, cast all your spells as quick as you can, build up an army of golems, and just attack, 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 attack. Use tap down spells to tap down your opponents to get lethal attacks in. Use your extra combat spells to make sure you can get multiple instances of damage in per turn. Combine very nicely with any card you have that gives your creatures indestructible so that you can just swing in willy-nilly without needing to worry of anything dying in combat damage. That said, let's say your opponents are not so keen to let you keep your creatures. There, you might be playing a bunch of removal, a lot of board clears. Then you have the option to just hold back a little bit. You're getting a 4/4 golem with every spell you cast once GFR is on the field. You don't need to dump the board immediately to start being impactful. Just maybe 1 or 2 spells a turn. Keep your hand full of spells, but play enough to keep your board present within hitting distance. Then when you finally end up drawing one of your spells that makes your creatures indestructible, a nice little defense against something like a board clear, then you can start being a little bit more aggressive with building your board state. You have that protection. You'll be able to build up the board, maybe survive a single board clear, but that quite often might be all you need to finally get that final damage through. So that's pretty much how you go about playing this GFR deck here. And at this point, I want to hear from you folks. I want to hear from you whether you built a General Ferrous Rokiric GFR deck, if you've ever built a deck using this specific deck building restriction of using only cards that are exactly your commander's color identity, or if you've built with under another restriction that I have never heard of before. I would love to hear some cool ways that some of you folks have built your decks. Beyond that, thank you very much for joining me today. Like I said, going forward, we are going through a renaissance of this channel where we are going to be releasing projects that I am working with some of the coolest people in the Commander community on. I'm talking to people like Sheldon. I'm talking to people like Shivam. I'm talking to Cobblepot. I'm talking to people like Magic Arcanum, Ryan from Magic Arcanum. These are some really cool personalities that just by saying hi, I was able to get some really cool conversations with, and hopefully these super cool conversations translate as well to the videos as what I experienced. At this point, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit rambling for you folks. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I'll see you guys again in the future.